Hello again. Welcome to another installment of our header and footer builder partial series. Today we're going to be exploring the particle in great detail. So just to back up and give a little history on how this came about, when we were in the initial stages of brainstorming what we wanted to see these builders become, we knew that the granularity of controls and options for things you could style was very important. And as you've been playing around with the tool, you see how much control you have over your typography and your colors and dimensions and box shadows and borders. And I mean, everything is kind of at your disposal. But we knew that just as important as those granular controls, and maybe even more so important, was the functionality we put on top. So for example, we knew we wanted to overhaul sticky bars and allow you to have a lot more options at your fingertips to achieve a lot of different combinations of layouts. It'd be very easy to just say, hey, you can have, one sticky bar and turn it on and it kind of does this and, that's that. But the idea with kind of everything we've built was to kind of curate the experience a bit. So to not just, again, throw you in the deep end to where you're essentially, practically coding something from scratch, but to give you a curated environment to work in that has all the kind of, again, what we say, the gritty stuff worked out. So all this Flexbox stuff, all of the markup is there. You just get to focus on designing and letting your, vision come to life. So that brings us to menus, links, buttons. It essentially started as menus, but we knew that it was really important to have a collection of menu styles for you all to play around with. And these would be the little accents that you see when you interact with maybe a navigation item or a sub-menu. Because it's one thing for, an icon or an image to change or some colors to change, but these little flourishes, it's those little details that really add a personal stamp on whatever you're doing. So we did quite a bit of research and we looked at some kind of common patterns, some trendy design ideas, and we came to a conclusion. We could do one of two things. We could either ourselves design, 50, 70, 100 different styles that just from a big list you could choose from. Or we could give you full control to some extent over, what you want to do with these menu styles. So the first one didn't really suit our needs because, number one, if you were to choose one of those styles, you've got 60, 70, 80, 100 more sitting in a style sheet somewhere not being used. So it's just unnecessary resource usage. And there's always something that a user will always want to tweak. So whether it's positioning or sizes or colors of these little accents, there's just always something to adjust. And so we knew that option A wasn't going to work for us. So that's where we kind of set out on this journey to do a little just outside the box thinking, and we ultimately came up with what is now these particles. So you can think of them as an abstract little stylable piece of content that, again, has a few curated controls that give you a incredibly wide array of possibilities and things you can achieve. So everything from, here's an integrity preset on this drop-down content area. We've got this kind of, it looks like a water drop effect almost. And that is two particles that are expanding from the center, one with a slight delay to achieve that look. We do the exact same thing with our renew toggles. The only difference is this second one, well, it starts transparent and then goes to this style right here. But the second one also is not the full width. So you see a little bit of a border effect here. So that's kind of a creative alteration of the idea here. And then we've got things like our, just simple lines, little, again, accent touches that add a lot. We've got things like our icon toggle here where these two little lines that appear are actually two pixel-wide particles that are slightly delayed. You see the left one come in, then the right one. And this, again, is something you could achieve with a border on either side, make them transparent, make them gray on hover, but it's these little touches, those little stamps like we talk about, that really give a little bit of an identity and a personality to whatever you're working on. And if we were to activate that, We see our little green highlight there. Again, that's a particle style. And we'll dive into a few of these to show off some ideas. I do have a whole row here of examples we're going to run through and show you guys how to play with those examples. And then we've got this renew modal example here. So these lines here kind of animating in. There's a little trick to that, but we'll walk through that at some point. So anyway, the idea was to have a abstract little stylable piece of markup that was very flexible using a very little amount of controls. So that's, I think, enough backstory. Let's just dive right in here. And you will find these particles at the very end of any of your anchors. So we've talked about the anchor particle already that powers our buttons, toggles, and links. And at the end of any of your anchors, you'll see this interactions section. So you've got some text interactions, and you can toggle on or off both your primary and secondary particle. So you have two to work with, and they use the exact same feature set. So we're just going to kind of run straight down the line here and discuss these options. Then we'll go through these designs that I've worked on, and I'll kind of explain these you can't see because of the observer. I'm going to show those on the front end, but we'll explain how you achieve some of these effects, and some are just kind of to demonstrate an idea, and hopefully it gives you a sense of just how much is achievable with this really cool little set of options here. So the first thing we have is our location. So this is where you are physically putting your particle somewhere within, again, your button, toggle, or link. So you have 9 options, and essentially you can think of it like a grid. You've got top left, right bottom, and then each corner, so top left, top right, and the other corners, and then dead center. So as you can see here, when I hover over this button here, we've got something that looks like it's kind of growing out of the center, and that is because we've placed our particle right in the center. If I were to put it to the left, you would see that, and actually because of the placement here, let me do this real fast. You would see it looks like we've got something kind of growing out of the side now, right? Because it's on the left side. And that actually brings me to an important distinction here with this placement control. So the placement has to do with where you are physically kind of putting that particle relative to its location. So for example, and actually it won't do anything if it's on the center, but what it means is, imagine you had a, let me think here for a second. Well, let me take this guy, and now we're going to run through this in a second. But let me jump down here to the end. And let me place this particle we have at the top and inside. Okay, so notice how all of the circle is oriented at the top edge of my button. It's horizontally centered, but at the very top edge. That's because its location is the top. If I put it at the top left, you'll see it's up in that corner. And it's not, it's a circle, right? So imagine it actually does fill back there. If we put it at the left, it's right there. We could do bottom left. So you can see we can literally work our way all the way around the edges of our anchor. Let me put this back at the top. If I were to change the placement from inside to overlap, what's effectively happening here is, again, imagine half of this circle moving outside of the anchor. So the other half is basically over here. And this allows you to get a lot of different looks. And there's a lot you can play around with here, and we'll go into it in more depth. But just keep that in mind, that overlap essentially means you're overlapping the edge of the button with the particle itself. And that has no bearing on if it's centered. Placement really does nothing either way. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're going through some of these items. Let me jump back to my material button. All right, so then we have our scale and delay. So you can effectively really drastically change the way these items animate in by either having no scaling. So this would literally just appear, see how the background just looks like it's getting lighter? It looks just like a background color change. That's because it's just fading in at that point. So that can be useful in some situations. Scale all, you can see that, again, this circle appears like it's kind of growing out of the middle there. if we were to do scale X, see how this looks like it's growing horizontally? And then scale Y will appear to be a kind of vertical scale. So just keep that in mind as you're playing around with these ideas. And then you have a delay. So the delay says, I don't want this particle to come in right away, but maybe wait 0.5 seconds or something. So we're using that, for example, here. That's how we get some of these effects like that. And then the transform starts from essentially has to do with the direction that the particle will be transforming in from. So if I jump back to this one, since it's kind of noticeable enough here, because some of these things are very subtle, but they do have a big effect. Notice my transform starts from the center. So I have a circle that's effectively just expanding because I'm scaling in all directions from the center. If it starts from the top, again, remember my location is the center of my anchor, but now notice how it looks like it's growing in from the top of that circle. So the circle itself is still located in the center of the button, but it's growing from the top of where it originates. Or we could do top left. See it coming in from that top left corner. Bottom right. So that's what the transform starts from does. Just something else to kind of keep in mind there. And then you ultimately have the ability to style the dimensions of your particle, so height and width, and you can use ems, pixels, percentages, which is really cool. We'll show some examples with that here. You can add a radius, so we can play around with making them different shapes, like rounded squares or rectangles or full circles. You can use percentages to get little kind of elliptical patterns. And then we can add a color. So that's the end of kind of the native options for the particle, and there is a lot you can do with just that. I'm going to show you a few things that you can do adding just some simple inline CSS, and what this is really just a little entry point for you to add some additional styling that, we could try to cram a few more options in here, but it might feel like a little too much to take on all at once, and it's just a little point for those who maybe want to do a little more with the particles. They can do something there with the inline CSS, and we'll walk through that in a sec. So really what I want to do is I want to take a moment to walk through some of these examples I've set up. And let me, I'll jump back here, and we will go back down to our interactions. And I'm just going to save that, make sure it's on the front end. And let me just preview these for you before we go back there. So we've got our material design, which is kind of this, it's growing. It's like a little circle growing out of the middle. We've got this background fill. So we've got two items kind of occupying different halves of the button that are scaling in. We've got two items here scaling in from the side, but notice we've got this little diagonal line here that we're playing with. Then we have these minimal styles, where we're just kind of playing with lines and shapes. Same thing here, but notice we've got these corner styles, and that's using some of the custom CSS, which you'll see. We've got this full height option, which is one particle is animating in one direction, so scaling Y, and then this purple piece up here is scaling X across. That's a cool way to combine those effects. We've got this spotlight effect, and there's a secondary part to this I'm going to show you in a bit. And then we have our whoa, which I'll show you what's going on there in just a sec. So let us start with our material design. So again, the idea here was to have a circle at the middle that scales out when you hover. And you can see the circle a little better if I make this smaller. So there's my circle right there. I've made it much smaller. And now the idea with this is you could make this 100% and take away the border radius. But what you're going to get with that is essentially a square or a rectangle, the exact shape of the button you're working in. So your percentages are always relative to the shape of the button itself or the container. If you want a true like circle, you'll have to set hard dimensions for that. So we could again go back to 4 ems, and just 100 ems for the radius will make it a circle. But so what's happening here is that the circle is not big enough to fill up all that space, which is fine. That actually might be an effect you're kind of going for. But if you need it to go the entire width of the button, if you have a button and you know what text you're using in it, you can basically just say, okay, well, 8 ems really covers the whole button. So that's enough for me. And that gives me the look I want. Or if you're using this style in like a navigation, you might have to be okay with if certain links are a little longer. Again, since this is a hard width, it might be a little shorter on some buttons because if the button itself is longer, the circle will appear smaller relatively. So that's just a little trick there, but something you can play around there. You can definitely get these cool kind of shapes that look like they're kind of blooming out of nowhere. And that's a neat effect. Again, if I make this a little smaller, just so we can see it, watch what happens if I were to move. So I'm keeping my transform starts from the same, but if I were to put this at the top, again, notice what's happening. It's aligning itself at the top edge there and growing down. So what I really might want is to have it overlap on that top edge, and now we've got it growing inward like that. So we can play with making it a little bit smaller. So lots of little subtle things to try there. You can also try making it wider, but then making it slightly taller. And then you can actually use percentages. So if you did 50% for the radius, notice we've got kind of this, it's like an oval. It's not a pure circle, but percentages allow you to get these kind of longer oval shapes, which are kind of neat to play around with. So that's just an idea there of, 5 ends. And again, we could try that on all sorts of different sides, maybe a corner. And again, imagine building something a little smaller and you could have it mirror in the other corner. All sorts of things you can play around with. But for that material effect, center, center. Again, this doesn't matter if we have it centered in our location, and we're just scaling all here. And again, remember the difference too. If I make it scale X, see how the circle appears to come in and out that way? It almost looks like a flip, like it's kind of flipping from transparency. But again, to get that full spread, we would need to make sure it's big enough to cover our button. So that's that kind of effect. Next, we're going to play with this fill background example. So there's a bit going on here. And let me get it all loaded up here. Now, a little note on effects like this. When you're doing these sort of full bleed effects, where you want it to take up everything, if you're using ems or rims or a relative unit, you need to be kind of careful that you're using a size that is rounding your pixels up appropriately, because if you kind of use a value that might translate to a partial pixel value, sometimes you can get like this, it might not look like it appears to fill all of the space in. And you can get around that a few ways. You can make sure you play with background colors to match. So for example, this is white. Both of my particles are white. And if I was getting a little blue that was showing through still, I could make this white, and that would end up kind of covering it a little bit. Or you can just use pure pixel values if you're having a hard time with getting your ems for like the padding just right. You can use pixel values, and that will always get set up appropriately. So what is happening here? If you'll notice, we've got our background is staying blue both times. And what we essentially have here are two particles. So my first one is starting in the top left corner, so that's up here. And then my other one is starting in the bottom right. And they are placed on the inside. They're scaling X, so horizontally. And then I just have the transform starting from top left and bottom right, so to match these. And that's kind of nice because you can play around with altering these directions and getting essentially a different effect. If you were to just make this say top, sometimes these would not maybe do exactly what you're expecting. And that's because of the positioning, the physical positioning on the button itself. So having those match is kind of nice. You can swap those, and then we could even do scale all. Now remember, these are going to start from the corners. So that's 3 different looks right there, simply playing around with the scaling options after we've set this up. And really all we've done is each of these particles is 100% wide and 50% tall. And then their background is white. So you could play with that too. You could make them 50% wide, 100% tall, play with that orientation. You could mix and match, do kind of a ratio. And then of course you could even try delaying one. And notice too that the delay only works on the hover effect. And that's because when you're interacting with something at first, you kind of don't know what to expect, so you're kind of engaged in the whole interaction. You wouldn't really necessarily want to see it stair step out. It would feel kind of weird. So when you leave, both particles will just kind of go back to their normal position at the same time. Let me put this back here. And then again, like I was saying, there are some subtle ways you can change the overall look and feel of this. So for example, if I were to, instead of keeping the background blue, if I were to make this white on hover, you can see it's a little smoother because you're seeing that background change to white while these white particles are coming in. And that will give you a slightly different look that doesn't feel as linear as this. And then of course the only other thing changing here really is the text from white to blue to kind of complete the overall look. So again, on the front end, that is like so. Next we have this this particle skew effect. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. So what we have is, again, we've got this kind of blue border, and then we have our 2 particles. We have one positioned on the left. So remember that left position means on this side, and it really would be vertically centered, but since these are 100% tall, it's essentially just taking up this whole height. The other one is positioned to the right, and you'll notice these are both 100% wide, but they only look like they're taking up 50% of the width, and that is because we are overlapping both of these. So for example, this is 100% wide, so it would normally take up the entire width of this button, but since we're overlapping it, it's like taking the button and moving it back this way a little bit. So imagine half of it is like hanging off the edge, but it's hidden past this boundary. That's the thing with these particles. They can't go beyond the boundary of the button or the link or the toggle that they're in. So just imagine that half of it has been scooted kind of off canvas, and that allows us to get this growing effect, this kind of scaling in effect that we want, where they meet in the middle. And so then we're scaling X, so they're coming in horizontally. And then this is the first time you're seeing that we're using our inline CSS. So we are applying a little transform to each one of these. So notice they have the exact same skew, negative 20 degrees. And that is what gives us our little effect right here. Now the other kind of neat thing we're doing to complete kind of this look, some of these things are very subtle, but we have a text transform on, so this slide from bottom, and this all works really nice together because there's a lot of kind of motion happening at once. It just kind of helps cement the overall look. It feels really nice. And again, notice that the animation for the text happens when you come in, but when you leave, it just all fades back to its standard position. And then very, very subtly, you'll notice that the border actually changes on hover to this dark color. So we get a little more definition around that edge, and the text is also changing to white. So that's kind of how that look comes into play. And I don't even know, let's just try this. Let's see what that might look like. That's kind of unique. Okay, so, and that makes sense. I've got these horizontally positioned items that are scaling in from the top and bottom, but what I could do, I wonder if I made this 200, or not 200 wide, let's try 200 tall. So yeah, that's always just scaling in from the center because of how we have it set up there. So sometimes you have to experiment. It doesn't quite do what you might imagine at first, but it's just about kind of playing around and seeing what is possible. So that is the kind of particle skew effect. Next, we have these two minimal looks. So the effect here is essentially this button is taking up a physical space. I've just taken away any defining boundaries that might be there, whether it's a box shadow. See, this button or this toggle right here actually has no border, but this box shadow kind of helps define its space. What I've done with these examples here is you can actually kind of see the space here. That's the space the button is taking up. But I've taken away any backgrounds or borders or box shadows, so it just looks like it's text kind of sitting there. And for this first minimal button, we've basically got our two particles. One is located in the top, and again, that means top center. One is at the bottom, bottom center. And we have a little line that's basically 2 pixels tall, 33% wide, and it's just a subtle gray line. And that's how we're getting that overall look. Now there's a lot you can do simply by moving those items around. For example, we might move this to the top right, and we'll keep this transform the same. And we can move this to the bottom left. We'll save that. And so now we've got the same effect, those same lines just moved to different corners, and they're transforming in from that corner. Now we could swap the transform around so the lines will remain in their corners, but we could make the transform, let's say, come from left, and we'll make this come from right. So again, the lines are in the same corner, but now they're growing in the opposite direction. So there's a lot you can play with there. For example, we might even make these 50%. Oops, 1 second here. We might make these 50%. And again, so those are transforming from the center. And if we wanted them to come back from their corners, we could just match the location. There we go. So lots we can do there with lines. And again, imagine these lines, you can play with them vertically. And really it's the same thing as this. Those are both lines, right? It's just that this line happens to be 100% wide and 50% tall. So a lot you can do just playing with the dimensions there. Now this one's kind of interesting. This is another creative use, a very simple use of the inline CSS feature. Let me pull that button up. So we have our, you're probably familiar with what is happening already. We've got basically our two particles positioned in different corners, and they are scaling in using the all option. And then they're basically squares. So they're just 1.5 ems tall and wide. But then what we've done down here is so we've put a border around the whole square. So we added a 2 pixel border, and then just depending on the corner it was in, so since this was in the top right, we wanted to remove the left and bottom borders. And that is what, so again, here's the top right. So we remove the left and bottom borders so that we essentially just get this kind of little caret that is like outlining the corner there. And then we basically do the opposite with this one. So bottom left, we remove the top and right borders, and that's how we get that look right there. Now there's a lot more you could do with this, playing around with box shadows. In fact, I'm gonna see if I can make something happen here. So this is my top right one, inset. Let me just see what that's doing. Okay, yeah, not doing quite what I was expecting. There's a lot you could do with like inset box shadows to, for example, I'm just going to actually make this guy, oops, active. The effect I was kind of going for, it might be a little hard to do. Yeah, that's kind of it. So again, we can play with shadows coming inside, little bits of depth. Let me actually add this here. And then we could do the opposite. That should give me what I'm thinking of in my head. 1 second there. Yep. So, I mean, very subtle, but a little bit of texture, a little bit of depth, and you could play with colors and get the shadow just right. And there's a lot you can do to add some cool flavors there. But the primary effect there was the kind of border effect. Then we have this full height example. So what is essentially happening here is we have our two particles, both styled pretty differently this time. Each of these examples, we've always had two particles styled pretty similarly. This time we have our top little purple bar scaling horizontally using X, and then we have our kind of big gray bar coming down. And so to achieve this, the one thing to keep in mind with this too is that your secondary particle always appears on top of the primary one. So if you're trying to like stack particles to get a certain look, you'll want to put the secondary one on top. But we essentially have our big gray bar is 100% wide, 100% tall, starting from the top, placed inside, scaling Y, right, going vertically, and then the transform starts from top. So it's literally just coming straight down. Whereas this other little line is 100% wide, 3 pixels tall, placed at the top, and scaling X. Now we can change the look of, for example, that big gray box if we were to do scale all. Now see how it looks like it's growing from all sides. Now this is kind of a cool look because notice how the gray box and the purple line are scaling horizontally at the same rate, but the gray box is also scaling down. This is kind of a cool look, and you're starting to see how just some very subtle ways of combining these give some really different looks. And since this is 100% tall and wide, we can actually play around. We could do this from the bottom, and they could meet in the middle, kind of. Right? So lots of different effects there. Let's just do Y like this was. And then similarly, we could do the same with our line here. So if we made this scale Y, it really gives it a very subtle but a different kind of feel. It's not quite as dramatic as the, oops, this is coming from the top. It's not as dramatic as the X because you're going to see that coming in for a lot longer. But we just get a subtle kind of fade in there. Now again, you could delay this too. So we might do a delay on the purple. And actually, let me scale X. All right, so now we're seeing that layered animation. And then let's try scaling this one. Right? So lots to explore once you get a general setup. And that's how I would think of these particles too. Think of the general space you want it to occupy within your anchor, and kind of get that set up. And then you can play around with the scaling, the delays, the orientation, because this is kind of a cool effect. It looks like this particle is expanding and then allowing that to fall out of it. Lots of really neat things you can play with there. Then we have our little spotlight example here. This is kind of a more dramatic example of this material example here. But again, maybe thought of more like a menu item where you maybe have text kind of floating in a nav bar. And there's a couple things to explore here, some of which I already did earlier. But for example, if we were to keep this at overlap, so it's going to overlap the sides, but I can move this to the top, the bottom, get all sorts of cool, active styling. It's just real dramatic, real engaging, very fun to play around with. Let's put this back at the center. And then I'm actually going to turn this secondary one on here. So what's happening here is we have a second circle and the background is white. And so again, since it's a secondary one, it's appearing on top. But there's a little bit of a delay. So after 0.3 seconds, that second circle comes in and just allows for this little outline of the yellow here. And what we're doing to get that outline essentially is we're saying we're matching the width here. So the width and height here is 3 ems, and we're using calc. If you've been watching these videos, you see that I use this a lot. And then we're subtracting 4 pixels from it. So we're keeping the ems, subtracting 4 pixels from the ems, and that's what gives us this little 2 pixel border all the way around, because it's like 2 on each side equals 4. Again, we could take that delay away and just get the look right away. So lots of different ways to play around with that stuff and get all sorts of cool effects. Now we could even do, for example, let me keep the ems. Not quite what I'm going for. 1 second. All right, so this is kind of an interesting idea, but so what's happening here is our secondary particle is the same width. So we're getting a little white spot down here for it to go through, but then we're subtracting some height from it, which is what's allowing a little bit of that yellow to shine through, and you get this kind of, interesting shape going on here that you can play around with. And again, these are just ideas, and I'm literally playing around with these, off the cuff, and some of it, even for me, I'm still exploring and finding all sorts of cool ideas that honestly I had never even explored until we made this tool. And that's what's kind of neat to me, is like to be finding new ideas using this tool. It's been really neat. So let's get that. Let's match these again. And there's all sorts of ways. You actually wouldn't need to necessarily use this second particle to get that look. You could do one particle and make it white and then add a yellow border. All sorts of ways to work on that stuff. And then just for fun, I had this whoa button that we made here that was slightly inspired by the, if you're familiar with the cartoon from the States, Looney Tunes, classic. At the end of every episode, Porky Pig would come bursting out of this kind of circular display. And that's, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was like, I just kind of wanted to try and recreate that. So what we essentially have here is our particle. Again, you've seen this, centered, scaling all. It's set to 2 ems. We've got a circle. And then I'm just using multiple box shadows and using the same color here, but RGBA, and I'm slowly fading out as each piece goes out. So the first piece is only spread out 0.5 m's, the next one is 1 m, then 1.5, and then 2. And you'll notice that the opacity goes down with each one of those. So here's 6, 0.6, 0.45, 0.3, and then 0.15. And that gives you the faux Looney Tunes end of every cartoon look. It's definitely kind of a unique look. It's kind of a style I want to like explore more because I feel like there's some more design ideas there that are kind of interesting, especially seeing it cut off. Well, and we could even play with, if we kept this overlap, moved it to the top. And that's what's neat too, is once you have something kind of designed, you can then just play with moving it around. Oh, and I've got this the text is scaling in here. So, find those really cool kind of like tasteful ways to pair up different animations. Let's try this on, let's try it on the side. Yeah, all sorts of fun stuff to play around with there. And then one more little trick that I wanted to show off. Well, there's a couple more actually. And I would say until we get in the preset system where y'all can make your own and save and be getting those things out, do experiment with the presets that we have for the different stacks. So for example, this is an icon navigation dropdown, and you can just inspect the toggle and you could go over to its interactions and you could see how those particles are set up. You could inspect the links themselves and get an idea for how the interactions on these drop-down links are set up. This one was kind of interesting. So basically what I did was, again, it's positioned on the left side, on the inside, and it's scaling X. It's transforming from the left. So the width is 11 pixels. But what I've done is added this 5 pixel white border around it. And if you look right around there, you'll see that's about 5 pixels of spacing in between there and right around there. And so since we're using, the box sizing method we do in X, essentially this width is being pushed in by the border on the outside here, and that's what gives you the 1 little pixel of green right in here. So kind of a unique approach to that look. And then similarly with this effect here, this is a great one to explore. So you can use box shadows. This will pull up, for some reason my recording while I'm doing this all at the same time is slowing everything down. So while we've got, what we have here is we've set up a line that is 0.15 m's wide, 50% tall, and they're positioned at either side of the link. So this one's on the left, this one's on the right. Just scaling from the center, kind of standard setup. But then what we're doing is we're applying a box shadow that's moving that line out. So the particle itself is transparent, and this that you're seeing, this is actually a box shadow kind of transforming out from the position of where the actual particle is, because this particle is really just aligned right up here at the edge. So if I were to actually take this, place it in here, see, so that's our actual particle. Our particle is lined up right here. And what's happening is we're using a box shadow that's like mimicking the shape of our particle, but it's physically moving it away, because that's what this first part of our box shadow is, our X axis. So we're moving it 0.85 m's away from the side. And that's a really cool way to get that effect, where you're essentially moving stuff away from the side. And again, you could make that as, big and drastic as you wanted to. Notice it's not matching up, but we could. Or you can make it much more subtle to get that effect. And then again, you can play around with, if you scale X, you'll get kind of a different look. I'll make them both scale X so they do the same. So now they just look like they're kind of coming in from the side. And then if we do scale Y, they will just appear like they're kind of scaling in from the middle of the anchor there. So anyway, that is just, I mean, believe it or not, we're really only scratching the surface of all sorts of things that are possible with this little particle. Do explore it. There's so much to do there. I look very much so forward to seeing what you guys come up with, because just in our beta testing, seeing what people were coming up with and seeing what different employees have come up with, it's been really neat. So we look forward to seeing that. I hope you guys have gotten a lot out of this video today, and we will be bringing more to you very soon, as always. Thanks, guys.